I'm a baby boomer. Most of the people around here are. The three most pivotal, perhaps, events in our lives from a political and perhaps social standpoint were the assassination of John Kennedy, the Vietnam War, and the resignation of Richard Nixon. You were not an observer. You were a front lineman on each of those stories. You're on the Warren Commission. You certainly had a big part in the Vietnam War, and obviously the resignation. Do you ever look in the mirror when you're shaving in the morning and say, my God, I have been involved in so much?
Well, my life has not been dull. I was on the scene, active in many, many things that happened during this century, and the three you mentioned were very, very significant. I was a good friend of Jack Kennedy. Our offices were adjacent to one another. I developed a warm friendship with him when he was in the House of Representatives. He was a most attractive president, and it was a great tragedy that he was assassinated. I am the sole surviving member of the Warren Commission, which investigated the assassination of Kennedy. We undertook this duty. There were 7 of us at the insistence of President Johnson. We came up with what I think are 2 very important decisions. Number 1, that Lee Harvey Oswald committed the assassination. And secondly, the Warren Commission decided that we found no evidence of a conspiracy, foreign or domestic. I have seen no new evidence in the 30-some years that have transpired between Kennedy's assassination and today, no new evidence that would change my mind. I stand by and I am proud the job that the Warren Commission did, and I challenge anybody, including Oliver Stone, to show that our conclusions were inaccurate. I get overwhelmed with requests to talk about the assassination. I can only say the Commission did a good job, and I support our conclusions.
You have been involved in so much. You have seen so much. You have started out in the place that still calls you their favorite son. And 100 years from today, this museum will be here. Young children will come here. News people will come here. And they will look at the steps from the Saigon Embassy, and they will look at the other displays. How would you hope, not that any of us has a hand in how history remembers this, but how would you hope people remembered Gerald Ford, not just as a president, not just as a long-term congressman, but as a man? How would you like for people to remember what you have done?
I would hope that historians down the road would look at my record in the White House and my record in the Congress and say that I contributed significantly to the healing of the wounds of Watergate and the Vietnam War. When I took over the White House, this country was torn apart with dissension and conflict. Families disagreed. People, the length and the breadth of the country disagreed. So when I became president, I tried to restore public confidence and trust in the White House. I think I did, and I hope that's what historians will write some 50 years from now.
I have a couple of minutes left, and I am going to use every moment that I can get.
Go ahead.
Would you have preferred, moot point as it turns out, would you have preferred to be Speaker of the House of Representatives instead of President of the United States?
My total political ambition when I went to Washington was to become Speaker of the House of Representatives. I was a legislator. I love being a legislator. And to sit in the speaker's chair would have been the greatest accomplishment that I could imagine. Things got convoluted, and I ended up being vice president and president. I was honored to serve in either or both of those positions. But from the point of view of enjoyment in a political role, you couldn't beat being Speaker of the House.
Politics in 1976 was different. You've talked about, I went through this list of people, Lyndon Johnson, Tip O'Neill particularly. These were people with whom you did not have a lot of political common ground, or at least there was a significant amount of non-common ground politically. Yet you spoke favorably, very gentlemanly of both of them, as you do about most everyone that we talk about. Politics was a different animal then. But in 1976, you and then Governor Carter had what I think up to that time was it was gentlemanly, but you guys had the gloves on. I mean, you were out there doing that. There were debates. There was, if I recall correctly, the night the election was over, your voice was gone. You couldn't even talk. I remember watching a press conference, and I think Betty spoke for you, Mrs. Ford spoke for you. That has to be bitter. But now, today, describe your relationship with Jimmy Carter, please.
Well, Jimmy Carter and I had a head-to-head confrontation over the election for the presidency. On the other hand, we were adversaries, not enemies. And when you adopt that attitude, when the ball game's over, you can sit down and become truly friends. And the facts are, Jimmy Carter and I, in the last 20-some years, have become very close personal friends. We have developed not only a friendship, but an admiration for one another. He has come to Grand Rapids, participated in certain activities at the museum. I've gone to Atlanta and reciprocated at his museum. We have traveled to the Sadat funeral together. We traveled to King Hussein's funeral together. So we have done a great many things, and in addition, Betty and Rosalind Carter have cooperated on some legislative matters, testifying before the House and Senate. So the Carters and the Fords have developed a unique, but I think a wonderful relationship, and I'm proud of it, and I suspect they are.
This museum and the development with the Amway across the way, I mean, this is really the rebirth of Grand Rapids, isn't it?
I was propositioned when we were deciding where to put the museum that we put it on the outskirts of the city out in the eastern side of Grand Rapids. I made the decision when we had to fish or cut bait. I said, I think the museum can be important to the center of town. I want it here. And it turned out to be a good decision.
And you like what you see?
I'm very proud of it.
Now my final two questions. You've lived a remarkable life. You've participated in things that most of us can only read about. If I had 3 days, I couldn't ask you everything I want to know. But when you look back, beyond your children, I'm sure, beyond your long marriage, what is the thing, the single thing, in your public life, I think we're talking about here, that you are the proudest of that you were able to accomplish?
There's no doubt that I'm proud of my congressional record, and particularly being the Republican leader for 9 years. I was disappointed I never got to be Speaker, but I am also very proud that when Vice President Agnew resigned, that there was a groundswell that I should be the nominee for Vice President. Two Democrats, the Democrat leader in the Senate, Mike Mansfield, and the Democrat Speaker of the House, Carl Albert, recommended to President Nixon that I be nominated. And an overwhelming number of House members urged Nixon to nominate me. And when I look at the vote in the House, where I was overwhelmingly approved by Democrats as well as Republicans, and when I look at the vote in the Senate, where I think the vote was 97-3, I'm mighty proud of that. And then I can't help but say that becoming president under very difficult circumstances, with an economic recession on my desk, serious negotiations over nuclear weapons with the Soviet Union, problems in the Middle East between the Israelis and the Arabs, problems in the Pacific with Japan, etc. We inherited a lot of problems, but with the help of a good cabinet and with hard work, we turned the country around. So I can't pick any one thing. I can only say a lot of good things happened, and I'm proud of them.
And the final question, and this might be equally difficult to answer.
Go ahead.
There's so many things that you did, so many things you participated in. Is there one thing that President Gerald Ford or Vice President Gerald Ford or Congressman Gerald Ford really wishes that you could have accomplished that you weren't able to?
I wish that I could have been elected in 1976, because I had about 5 important things I wanted to accomplish. For example, I wanted to negotiate a nuclear arms agreement with the Soviet Union, which would have significantly reduced the nuclear threshold. We were 95% there. If I'd been elected, we would have solved the problem. I wanted to expand the G7 program, which I was one of the initiators of. I wanted to get some legislation through the Congress that we didn't have time to do in 2.5 years. So there was a platter on the Oval Office desk of things that I desperately wanted to get done, and I could have achieved if I had been elected. Unfortunately, that didn't happen by a very narrow margin. So we did well, but there was always something challenging, something good that we might have done in another 4 years.